Hi folks, welcome to episode 49 of the Epochs of the Lotus Eaters. I'm joined by, as usual, Bo, because we are dealing with part 2 of the Peninsular War. Right, where did we leave off last time?
Okay, well, we were just about to talk about the lines of Torres Vedras.
Right, because as I recall, Wellesley had been beasting the French out of Portugal and had sort of established a foothold in the southwestern corner of the Iberian Peninsula. And what were the French going to do about it?
Yeah, so there was the Talavera campaign where
Right.
we had one of the biggest battles, certainly one of the biggest, one of the most important in the whole Peninsular War was Talavera, which we did win, but it wasn't sort of unbelievably decisive where there's no more French armies left in Spain, nothing like that. So it was a victory, but it was quite bloody, and Wellesley was created a Viscount after that, but nothing's over. So there's still plenty of armies, French armies in Spain. So Napoleon decides, because even though he's not in Spain, he was personally there at the beginning, but the vast majority of the whole Peninsular War, Napoleon's not there. But he still controls the grand strategy and everything. And he sends his idea is to reinforce stuff. You know, nothing's over.
Yeah.
We're going to reinforce everything. So what he does is he actually takes various bits of armies from all over the place and reinforces both to the north and south in Spain for a big push.
This is interesting because if the British plan is bog down the French in Spain and make them bleed men and resources, well, they've taken the bait.
Right, yeah. They're bleeding themselves further. Yeah. They're opening their own wound further, sort of thing, I suppose, yeah.
So, but, I mean, just before you go on, what was Napoleon's actual interest in Spain?
Well,
like, why did
that's
he
a good
need
question. Yeah, it's a good question, because a lot of people have said, well, this was a self-inflicted wound. At the end of it all, when you can look back. Yeah. In fact, I was listening to something just the other day saying it was a completely self-inflicted wound.
Yeah, I can't identify the strategic necessity for France to control Spain.
No, there wasn't really one because the old Spanish monarchy was doing everything he wanted, more or less. Well, the thing is, he wanted to invade Portugal.
Sure.
And he couldn't get to Portugal because
Spain.
Even the Bay of Biscay was completely controlled by the Royal Navy. So the only way there was through northern Spain.
But again, like, I can't help but think that this is not really very important to France as a geopolitical entity, that Portugal is under the hill. It just seems more like oh no, they still like the English. How dare they? How dare they? You know,
it's a bit that, I think.
Like, that's how it comes across, and I've got no idea why. And so I'm just looking at this thinking, well, the important thing is that he controls Central Europe, right? That he controls Germany, essentially, is the important thing, and then Italy as well. And so this gives him like the real core of Europe. But Spain is a non-entity at this point. It's not powerful. It's not strong. As you said, it was doing basically what he wanted anyway.
Yeah.
Why is all of this necessary?
No, it's a good question. One there isn't just a perfect answer for. So, for example, people that are massive fans or apologists for Napoleon will say...
I like the idea of a Napoleon apologist.
Well, you do sort of get it. I mean, so, for example, Andrew Roberts is one of those. And he'll say things like, Napoleon never wanted to control all of Europe or conquer all of Europe. He was just reacting to wars against him. And then they'll say... but then you can force them to say, apart from Portugal and Spain.
Yeah.
So it's like, OJ wasn't a murderer apart from the two murders he did. So it doesn't make sense when people say Napoleon was only ever reacting to the coalitions against him. It's not true. It's not true.
Egypt, then? Right,
yeah. They'll say, apart from the Spain and Portugal campaigns and Egypt, apart from those, he wasn't the aggressor. It's like, well, yeah, but they still count.
Surely the invasion of Russia counts as him being an aggressor.
Yeah, another example.
Like it's just, there are all these examples I can just pull off the top of my head, and I'm not a Napoleon scholar, you know, and it's just like, well, okay, he's the one invading all of these things.
Yeah.
Like, sorry, don't get me wrong, I don't begrudge Napoleon for wanting to conquer Europe. It's not unusual. Lots of people have wanted to conquer Europe. You know, that's not a unique moral failing. You know, I don't know, it's just such a weird line to take. Oh, Napoleon didn't want to conquer everything. Please, that's all he was.
Yeah. And he explicitly said it as well. So, yeah, exactly. I mean, he says, I will not be, I have to command. I won't obey anyone anymore, ever.
I mean, and someone who literally gets themselves crowned as an emperor, yeah, okay, I think the benefit of the doubt is gone at this point. But anyway, sorry. Right, so no particular reason that they're in Spain. They are actually bleeding men and manpower as the British intended, so this is working out.
Okay.
What happens?
So Talavera is in Spain. But after we won that big battle, they massed so much so more men and divisions and things,
Yeah.
that Wellesley and the British Army and the Portuguese Army retreat back into Portugal because they know it's coming.
Yeah.
Like 200 odd thousand guys, Frenchmen are coming.
Yeah. So how many? I mean, I take it the French aren't using much in the way of Spanish auxiliaries.
No. None at all. Any sort of Spanish, like sort of scratch battalions that have been put together fight on our side.
Oh, right. Okay. So, I mean, how many men do we have?
Well, at this point, I think about 40 odd thousand.
Right. And that's with Portuguese allies and Spanish.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
not good news when 200,000 angry Frenchmen come bearing down on you.
So where Wellesley's got this reputation for being a great defensive general, he actually fought loads and loads of offensive campaigns, loads of offensive battles. But there's 2 or 3 really famous ones, and this is one of the times where like all his campaigning in India was all offensive. After like 1812, everything in the Peninsular War was offensive. But there's some great defensive campaigns he fought, and this one where the French try and push down all the way to Lisbon and just push the British entirely out of Portugal or out of the peninsula entirely and completely defeat the Portuguese once and for all. So that's their plan.
Yeah.
And where we're massively outnumbered and outgunned, Wellesley has to fight sort of a series of fighting retreats, which he does superbly. So first of all, there's a big battle of Bussaco, again pronouncing a lot of these words incorrectly, where what that is a massive ridgeline. It's in Portugal, but it's way north of Lisbon. And it's this ridgeline that, again, Wellesley had sort of seen a year before or so. Like, this would be a perfect defensive position if and when we need to. And so we take the high ground of this ridgeline, and all the greats are there: Daddy Hill, General Leith, Picton, Crawford. They're all there on the field. It's sort of a great one. And the French send their columns up this hill, and we rain down on them. And we do have to retreat in the end, but it's not a defeat. I mean, it's a
strategic withdrawal.
Yeah, exactly.
And I imagine the French casualties are very high.
Yeah, it's very high.
So I recall reading about this one, specifically the speaking of the ridge is what reminded me of it, because apparently this was actually quite an innovation on Wellesley's part to actually have his men use physical cover to protect them from the enemy artillery and shot.
Yeah.
And this was new. It's like, oh, good idea. Maybe if we actually put a barrier between us and the enemy's guns, then more of our men survive and fewer of their men survive. And that's a force multiplier. It's like, it must be because of the paradigm that you're trapped in when you're operating. Because every general's within a paradigm of existing war. That's why they always say each general fights the previous war. And so, like innovating and doing something new, it's unusual. But it just seems like common sense is, why not just, hide behind a bit of terrain and shoot at them, when they're in the open and you're not. Yeah. That would be good for you. But this was a remarkable innovation, apparently.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because sort of kind of famously at Waterloo, one of the things Wellington does is put loads of his divisions behind a rise of ground.
Yeah.
So as far as the enemy can see, there's no one there.
Yeah.
And so if they try and attack and take that high ground, then they'll be suddenly confronted with a load of men.
Thousands of guns.
Those men, whilst they sit there, are not in the range or not in view of the cannon.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a double good thing from your point of view. Yeah. He famously did that on quite a large scale at Waterloo, but he does it a handful of times in the Peninsular War.
Yeah.
And he certainly does it at Bussaco a bit. Yeah. There's lots of sort of brave actions. And historians have argued a tiny bit about whether Wellesley planned to fully stop the French armies there, or whether he only meant to delay them and cause them casualties and things. But yeah, I mean, we're dealing with 30,000 plus guys, and they've got more like 60. And that wasn't even all the men they had in Portugal at the time, not remotely. So yeah, that's sort of again, it's considered one of Wellington's sort of something approaching a masterstroke. When you look at the details of it, it was really well done.
The French are basically approaching this in the sort of the steamroller tactic.
Oh yeah. They never changed that throughout the whole time.
We've got so many men, and they're good men, and so we're just going to wave after wave of them at you.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So Sir Charles Oman says this, quote, "The ablest of Napoleon's marshals, Massena, now headed now headed the French army of Portugal. Having overwhelmed Spanish resistance, Massena advanced across the frontier with 80,000 men. In September, there was a stiff battle at Bussaco. The French were badly mauled and beaten. Wellington's withdrawal nevertheless continued, end quote. That's just it in a nutshell. But even though it's quite a relatively important one, I mean, in my mind anyway, it's in sort of the top 10 battles of the Peninsular War.
Yeah.
Because it sort of plays into sort of the very next thing, which is one of the highlights of the whole thing, which is the lines of Torres Vedras, which, as I mentioned in the last Epochs, Wellesley sort of knew that it was likely, once they knew that Napoleon was sending lots of fresh troops into Spain and they weren't going to give up on the Portuguese campaign, he knew that there may well be, probably would be, some sort of desperate defence of Lisbon.
Yeah.
And he sort of realised this a good year or more beforehand. And so he ordered these lines of Torres Vedras to be constructed. And what they are is massive defensive lines all the way, earthworks around. So you've got Lisbon right at the very bottom, and it's very hilly countryside all around. And what he decided to do, 3 different lines, or in the end there was actually 4, of defensive work. So they're not a continuous line, as you might imagine, but just each strategic point. And there's over 150, 160 odd forts they made just in the first line. This is. So in other words, when the French army did get there, which they did, they take one look at these defences and think, "Oh God, like
this is going to be bloody.
This is going to be terrible. Yeah, this is going to be terrible." And one of the things that made it a bit of a masterstroke is that no one knew that Wellesley had done it. He'd ordered the people of Lisbon and the Portuguese to build all this, and a small number of British engineers. Yeah. But the majority of the British army and new British troops coming over from England, none of them knew that this was going to happen. He kept it super secret.
So I bet his own men were like, "Oh, thank God."
Well, yeah, right.
Oh, this is wonderful. We're going to face a giant French army, but we are an amazing fortification. Yeah.
And it's kind of unprecedented. So, again, the reputation that you're in safe hands if you're under Wellington. Yeah, it's absolutely true.
If you're going to be a soldier in the 19th century, it must have been great to have been one of Wellington's. Because, I mean, look, you're behind a hill. You're not, the cannons are thudding into the hill. I'm not being shot by cannon. This is brilliant. Oh, look, there's a sudden line of fortification. This is brilliant. Every day is not a disappointment for you. Whereas if you're a Frenchman, every day it's like, oh, God, up another hill. Oh, in another fort. Oh, that's, must have been heartening.
Yeah, no, sure. I would rather serve under Wellington than Napoleon.
Oh, God.
He's actually trying to make a logistics and supply line work for you.
Yeah.
Whereas Napoleon wasn't even trying to do that often.
Napoleon, I'm sure there was a comment of Napoleon's that goes something along, when he's talking about the Germans, and he's like, the Germans can't win. I spend 20,000 lives a month.
Yeah.
He's just like, look, it doesn't matter. They just die and it's fine. Human wave tactics for Napoleon. Well, I don't want that to be my general.
Yeah. I mean, it's lines like that which make where I could never call Napoleon great. It's lines like that,
Yeah.
Very
callous.
Yeah. I mean, he's a man of his time. They all were to some degree, but terribly callous, I feel. So these lines of Torres Vedras, they're sort of unprecedented. They would do things like there's a fault on all the main points, but they would make escarpments.
Yeah.
That's where you sort of level the side of a hill so it's sheer.
Yeah.
It only needs to be 10 or 12 feet, but you can't get a cannon up there now.
Yeah.
Things like that. Another thing is that Wellington was known, for example, at Waterloo, again, even his closest battalion commanders, like Urquhart or Picton, were like, "What's the plan for today, Arthur?" And he's like, you don't need to worry about it. I'm not even going to tell you in case it gets back to the French. So he was very, very, very tight-lipped, secretive about his plans and things. And so when the French got to the lines of Torres, it was absolutely 100% a surprise. And Massena, the French commander, apparently said to his subordinates, "Why didn't you tell me this?" And they were like, "We didn't know. We had no idea." And apparently Massena said, they said, "We didn't know he'd built all these defences." And he said, "Yeah, but he didn't build the hills, did he?" It might be apocryphal, that quote.
Right, that's interesting though, because it does imply that they didn't even know the lay of the terrain.
Yeah,
right. I mean, even if there were no defences and it was just very hilly country, that's a nightmare for an attacking force. So I mean, fair.
And they definitely did know because they'd been there 2 years before.
Yeah, yeah.
French armies had already been there.
So they just
did
hadn't
know.
thought to tell their commander what it was like.
I suppose so, yeah. And so they try and attack it a couple of times, a really sort of weak-willed, half-hearted attempt to try and get through the lines. But then apparently it's obvious to everyone on the French side that even if they could get through that first line, there's another 2 or even 3 lines, and then there's Lisbon itself. And so apparently they made the calculation that it was an outside chance, but it was possible to get through to Lisbon. But if you did get through to Lisbon, they'd be so badly defeated and bloodied that they wouldn't be able to hold it. And in fact, they'd probably get wiped out in the attempt.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.